Hi everybody, I'm Ms. Faith Goh. I'll be taking you through question 8 of the Dunman High paper. Is wealth the best measure of a nation's success? So when you see this question, you will need to figure out what are the two sides. So every GP question has two sides. So you need to think, how is wealth a good measure of a nation's success? And of course, the opposing view would be, how is wealth not the best measure of a nation's success? Of course, the inclusion of the term best will incline you towards taking this position. Students, because best means it is the top, the peak, right? The absolute best way to measure. And few things are the best measure. In fact, a lot of times, many of our good measures fall short. So in some ways, the question itself prompts you to be thinking about how measuring wealth or GDP may not be the best way to capture what how successful a nation is. So it should be quite this is the easier position to take. So taking the position that measuring wealth is not necessarily the best measure of a nation's success. And so this means this is the opposing view. Okay, so of course, to generate arguments for the supporting view on why it's not the best measure, you really need to unpack the term success. What are the aspects that are involved when we look at a nation's success? What factors do we want to look at? What aspects? Okay, but let's get the opposing view out of the way first. So the opposing view, you will be looking at how wealth is a decent measure of a nation's success. So of course, if a country is wealthy, has a high GDP, it means that the economy is doing well. It's a good reflection of the economy. It means higher spending power. So more options for people usually translates to better standards of living, better quality of life. So when a nation is doing well, it will attract foreign firms or investment, which often translates to more jobs. And if everything goes well, it means less unemployment. So if you look at some examples of politicians who focus very much on economic growth as a lever to improve the citizens' lives, you can look at China, Deng Xiaoping. Gusto Pinochet. You could also look at South Korea. Of course, you can. If you want, there's always Lee Kuan Yew. Okay, so these politicians really focus on economic growth as a way to uplift citizens' lives, and in many cases, in their rule, standards of living did go up, and their respective nations were considered successful. However, it is not necessarily the best measure, right? So the question is why? So how does it fall short? Okay, so let's go back to the brainstorming process. So when you look at success, what constitutes success of a nation? Of course, you have to look at economy and money, but what other aspects can we look at? Okay, so when you're doing your essays and you're preparing for GP, you really want to be Googling some things and looking up things. If you have your phones right now, you really want to type in what makes a nation successful. How do we measure success? What makes a nation great? And some of the things that you see, you should use it as ways to brainstorm ideas. Okay, so of course, if you look online, whoa, that's not what I want to show you. I want to show you this picture. Okay, so if you look at it, how does this is OECD, how does it measure well-being? So of course, right at the top, you're looking at income and wealth, but there are other aspects as well, right? So there's health, there is education, knowledge and skills, there's environment, there's subjective well-being, safety, civic engagement, and then inequalities as well. So all of these things would be triggers for possible arguments. And then at the bottom, it's not particularly relevant, but it may actually give you an idea as well for this question. It looked at how resources for future well-being as well, which is quite an interesting idea. So if we go back to our essay outline, in terms of success, of course there is the economy, but there's also health. There's something called well-being. There is the social progress index. There's something about inequalities, right? And effective governance, or effective institutions, environmental factors, and quite a bit more safety, education, so on and so forth. So this essay is quite broad, and it's a matter of how you want to scope it. But I'm going to show you my thinking process and how I might choose what to focus on. So if I look at this list, and I've already got my OV down, right? The idea that when I measure a nation's wealth, it shows general standards of living. Which of this list makes a good rebuttal for the OV? Okay. Inequalities would be a really nice rebuttal. Okay, so if I choose inequalities, because the idea is that even if a nation's wealth grows, if the wealth is not distributed equally, how in the world can I say that that nation is successful, right? So the idea of increase the size of the pie, but that pie also needs to be distributed equitably, not necessarily equally, but equitably, so that even the least rich member of society has a decent standard of living. Okay, so I have inequalities, and there are some other things that I might look at, but let's try to craft the thesis with what I have. So a thesis can be something like that. So you start, the thesis must have the opposing view. So the opposing view is typically a nation's success is measured by its GDP, as it is a reflection of how well the economy is doing. Okay. However, it is not the best measure, as it does not take into account income inequality, nor is it a good proxy for measuring, oh dear me, for measuring good governance, or whether its citizens are happy, healthy, and safe. So I already have the opposing view in the thesis. So the idea is that if you improve the economy, things generally look better. But then I also have the supporting view, and this would be the reasons for the supporting view. Okay, so if we go back down to the opposing view, okay, so however, so if I have my rebuttal, supporting view, so I'll say however, a nation's can hardly, how about this? A wealthy nation can hardly be considered successful if its wealth is not distributed equitably. So measuring GDP on its own does not take into account inequalities. Something along those lines. Okay, so of course you might want to look at some examples of countries that have a large income inequality. So South Africa, I just looked this up, and I think 0.1%, the top 0.1% own 15% of the country's wealth. So it is quite skewed. Of course, we can always look at Singapore, where the Gini coefficient went from 0.478 to 0.437 in 2022. I actually am confused as to whether that is a good or bad thing. Can I let you all figure it out? If need be, change the example. Yeah, I'm sorry. I think higher is worse, isn't it? Okay, but please swap it out. Okay, I can't quite figure. Let me look at it. Singapore declining. Also, okay, so not Singapore really. Okay, but inequality in Singapore is still not great. Or you can use another example. Okay, but of course the general idea is that if there is inequality, you can hardly say that a nation is particularly successful. Okay, so for my next supporting view, I might want to do something about effective governance or effective institutions or good governance. So I might write something like, in addition, even though a country may be very wealthy, it may not translate to greater well-being for its citizens if the government is incompetent or worse, corrupt. So I'm looking. So for this paragraph, I'm going to look at oil-rich countries, so resource-rich countries. So let me type it out so you can see. Oil-rich countries, or fossil fuel, resource-rich countries, right? That have mismanaged their wealth and caused a lot of problems. Okay, so the first would be Venezuela. Oil rich, but then due to mismanagement, corruption, they're now in an economic crisis. Another country would be Libya, also oil rich, but because the government can't agree, the government split to two parts, east and west. So for years they never maintained the dam, and of course the flood this past month, I think, led to a huge loss of life. When it flooded this past month, the dams broke, right? And a lot of it has to do with corruption, mismanagement. Both of these countries, they dealt with this thing called Dutch disease. Please look it up. I can't. If you can, Dutch disease is when countries who are resource rich suddenly have a lot of foreign investors coming in. It opens them up to certain risks, and it can lead to devastating consequences. Of course, the newest country to discover oil is Guyana. Of course, they haven't failed yet. But all of these examples, this would be the latest country And in a way, just simply having the wealth does not guarantee success. In fact, it is how the wealth is managed that is important as well. That is important. This would be a paragraph about effective governance, effective institutions of good governance. Okay, so if I were to continue with another idea, I may be thinking about happiness, maybe about whether citizens are happy. So I might write a question, a supportive view about that. So even if a nation is very happy, its citizens, oh my gosh, even if a nation is very rich, its citizens may not be happy or healthy. Happy, not so healthy, happy. So if you look at the top 3 richest nations or countries, that would be the US, China, Japan. The top 3 most depressed countries are China, India, and the US. The US is an interesting country to look at because they are the wealthiest country. I mean, Americans make more money than anyone else really in the world. Yet right now, in the US, they are struggling with a drug overdose problem, or drug overdose or substance abuse problem, and the issue has gotten so bad that their life expectancy has fallen for the first time, really, I think in the last 5 years. And if you look at it, they are they are first world country, and in fact, it's supposed to be a land flowing with milk and honey, right? Richest countries, yet it doesn't mean that the people are well or safe. I mean, of course, if you look at safety, I don't know whether you want to bring it up. I might not. It seems a bit mean. The issue of gun violence, crime, all of these, um, all of these affect how successful a nation can be considered. Okay, of course, as a bit of a point in converse, you could look at Bhutan, which has a gross happiness index. And it's quite interesting because Bhutan uses this gross happiness index rather than a GDP. And their idea is that happiness is more important than the GDP. But this example shows that because there are two indexes, it means that so GDP, and I don't know whether they call it GHI, but I'm just going to say the gross happiness index measures two different things, two distinct things. Money, GDP does not completely equate with happiness or well-being. So there is a point. If I'm going to write a last supporting view argument, I will be thinking a little bit about the future. Okay, so I might consider that the success of a nation also this also needs to wait. Oh, okay. Let's try this again. A nation's success needs to be measured Oh dear, I can't figure out. Wait, let me see something. Oh, okay. A nation's success also needs to take into account how well positioned they are for success in the future. Sorry about that. Brain's not really working. Um, what I'm thinking about for this point is the idea of environmental sustainability. So the idea that it is not enough to generate a lot of money and a lot of economic growth now. The question is whether a nation can continue to generate such economic growth and in the future for a long time. And in order to generate such growth in the future, um, countries have to put into place certain policies and laws or focus on environmental sustainable practices um, so that um, so that you can reap success for a long time to come. Okay, so I think this should be sufficient. If you look at it, explain how GDP is a decent measure, but show how it is insufficient. Show what other things that you need to look at. In your examples, if you can look at wealthy countries who have failed, that would be good. And then so if you look at it, all these countries are oil rich or wealthy, but not quite successful in some ways. And of course, something about the future will work well as well. Okay, there are other ideas. So this essay question is quite broad. So you can look at other ideas if you want. You could look at freedom, individual freedom. You can look, so you can measure the success of a nation with relation to human rights or freedom as well. You also can look at civic engagement as a measure of success. You could look at accountability and transparency. So looking at so various other things that you can look at. These ideas that I put up were just some that I think work well for this question. Okay, good luck. Please have this question typed down. Or the RI paper has a similar question. You should be able to attempt that one as well. Okay, thank you very much.